we've got another episode for you this week. Please like, share, subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and I hope that you enjoy this week's conversation. This episode will consist of topics around domestic abuse, domestic violence and sexual violence. If you require any support or help, please get in contact with your local domestic abuse, sexual violence organisation. In the UK, you can call the National Domestic Helpline on 0808 2000 247. And if you are listening overseas, please contact your national helpline where support, advice and guidance will be available for you. Hello and welcome to another episode. Thank you to everybody that is listening in and interacting and having a conversation. I am glad that these episodes are bringing you information and knowledge, and I hope that you continue to listen, get more information, empower yourselves with knowledge, get support if necessary. All I ask is that you just share amongst your friends, share amongst your colleagues, get the podcast out there to everybody, because I think that the information is invaluable across all of the different episodes. Before I start, I want to give a disclaimer. The subject that we're going to look at today is extremely sensitive. It's extremely sensitive for different communities. I hope that I do this justice. This episode is not to cause offence to anybody. Although it may be a really sensitive subject, I think it's a really important subject that we get to grips with. And all I'm going to be doing today through this episode is just shining a light. We're going to talk a little bit about honour-based abuse and violence. We're going to look at what that means, what is the definition of that. We're going to look at what some of those risks are and how to identify some of those risks. We are going to talk a little bit about protection for those victims that are experiencing honour-based abuse, and from a professional perspective, how we can share information sensitively and how to do that correctly. If you are affected by anything that is mentioned within this subject, if you are listening and you are recognising some factors within your own story, within your own life, within your own environment, in the UK, please reach out to an organisation called Karma Nirvana. I'll say that again, it's Karma Nirvana. They are an organisation that will support you with absolutely anything and everything that I will talk about. We have many listeners from across the seas, and your processes, your organisations may be slightly different depending on what nation, what country you are listening in. What I will say for those that are living in communities that outside of the UK, anything that I say within this episode is wrong and there is help, but you may need to research within your local environments about what is the best support for you and how you can escape the violence that you may be experiencing. With that, we're just going to go straight ahead and just get into it. Honour-based abuse, what is it? It can often be called honour-based violence. The acronym would be HBA or HBV. If you hear those acronyms, it would be related to honour-based abuse. And what it basically means is that it is a whole range of different practices which are used to control certain behaviours within families or other social groups in order to protect the perceived, and I say perceived in inverted commas, cultural and religious beliefs and or the honour within that family. Abuse will often occur when perpetrators perceive that a relative within that family has shamed them or shamed their community by breaking a code of honour. It is a violation of human rights. It can fit into that box of domestic and or sexual violence. There is no and cannot be any honour or justification for abusing the human rights of another person. For younger victims, anybody under the age of 18 in the UK, it is classified as a form of child abuse. The term honour-based abuse and violence relates to those offenders' interpretation of the motivation for their own actions. Honour-based abuse and violence will cut across all cultures and those communities involved. It affects people of all ages, but will often begin early in the family home. Girls and women are particularly at risk of honour-based abuse. However, boys and men are also affected, and that could be heightened if there are factors around disability, mental health, and sexuality. It is often distinguished from different other forms of abuse and violence as it's committed with a degree of approval or definitely collusion from other family members or community members. Women, men, younger members of the family can all be involved in the abuse to that one person or several people. Victims of honour-based abuse are more likely to be abused by multiple perpetrators at multiple times. There are no specific laws or legislation or policies in the UK which cover honour-based abuse or violence, although there may be subcategories such as forcing someone to marry. That is an offence, that is a criminal offence, a law in this country, and there is support through orders such as forced marriage protection order. Cases of honour-based violence or abuse will be prosecuted normally under specific offence committed. If somebody has been physically harmed through a punch, kick, slap, spit, that could be criminally charged and investigated under common assault. Inflicting serious harm could be seen through the criminal justice system as GBH. Stalking, harassment, if people are following, watching, relentlessly messaging, there are certain offences around stalking and harassment. Kidnap, rape, threats to kill and murder, they are all legislation within their own rights within the UK. So some of those risks, what are they? What does that look like? Well, honour-based violence, where it affects children and young people, is a child protection issue in the UK. So children and young people who are subject to honour-based abuse and violence, they are often at risk of harm and significant harm and or death through physical, sexual, psychological, emotional harm and neglect. And in some cases, they're also at risk of being killed. Children and young people may find themselves in very abusive and very dangerous situations against their will, with absolutely no power to seek help. The family members that they may talk to may not be available to them because they may be complicit within the abuse if there is a community where dishonour or shame has been brought upon them. Going outside of the community is likely to cause issues. Getting help and support can often be really difficult. Those usual avenues for seeking help are just not there. They're just not available to somebody that may want some support. Or if they're not able to get support, then there are, and I say this with as much sensitivity as I can, there's 3 options for victims of honour-based abuse and violence. The first option is to escape. That will bring a lot of different emotions and connotations, mostly the attachments within those families and not wanting to leave their family. They can submit, so they could submit to the abuse that they are experiencing. For example, if a young person, a young female, has met a boy that is not approved by the family, they can cut off all contact with that boy with the hope that the abuse may stop. They may pretend to submit on the surface or submitting to what the family is saying, but actually could be putting themselves into very risky situations by continually doing what the family members have perceived to be bringing dishonour and shame through secrecy. And if that gets found out, that could cause tremendous harm. And the other way to escape honour-based abuse is through death. That could be the death of the hands of somebody within that family. It could be, or the community, or it could be taking their own lives, that there is just no way that they are able to escape the abuse or violence, and so the only way that they see fit to be able to escape is to end their own lives. Honour-based abuse can and does include forced marriages. In the UK, that's approximately 1 in 5 cases. It can include domestic or sexual violence. I've already said rape, physical assault, harassment, kidnap, threats of violence, including murder, witnessing violence directed towards a sibling or parent, for example, or indeed another member of an extended family, cousin, aunt, uncle. And it can include female genital mutilation, FGM, which is an offence under the FGM Act 2003. So in 2003, it became a criminal offence for anyone to undergo genital mutilation within the UK. It's also a criminal offence to force someone to marry against their will. Everybody has the right to choose their own spouse. Nobody has the right to be forced into a marriage against their own will. I know that what I'm saying is really heavy. I'm just going to take a moment just to kind of process everything that I've just said, because it is heavy. And I can't apologise for the heaviness of this episode. I said right at the beginning it's sensitive. I said right at the beginning that it may cause some reaction inside of ourselves, where we may be hearing this for the very first time, and we are part of a community where honour and shame are very real, and that can cause reactions. Often victims will find it difficult to disclose the abuse that's happening within families. They will find it very difficult to leave those abusive relationships, or even ask for help if their immigration is uncertain. They may face a number of factors such as deportation, bringing further shame on families, financial difficulties, homelessness, losing their family, and if they've got children, the potential of losing their own children. The notion of shame and the associated risk to the victim may be persistent. It may be really long that somebody is suffering. Any new partners of the victim, children, anyone associated of their own siblings may be at serious risk of significant harm if they choose to continue a relationship with that victim. Behaviours that can be seen to be dishonouring a family can include, and these are just examples, it's not exhaustive, but it can include inappropriate attitudes, fighting back, answering back, standing your own ground, that really inappropriate attitude, especially where there is a patriarchal society and that patriarchal community, and a female in a different position and having an inappropriate attitude can cause dishonour. Different behaviours, wearing makeup or the way that somebody dress, having their elbows down showed, wearing jeans or leggings that show the shape of the legs, wearing dresses that accentuate curves, for example, all could be seen as bringing dishonour and shame. The existence of a boyfriend or a girlfriend that is outside of the family, that the family have not been involved in that relationship setup, or an unsuitable or perceived unsuitable relationship. For example, a gay, lesbian, transsexual relationship, rejecting an arranged marriage or resisting a forced marriage, bringing about dishonour on the family. Pregnancy outside of marriage will definitely be bringing dishonour and shame to family communities. Being raped, when a victim is raped, they are not in control of that rape. Somebody has thought that that was okay to violate somebody's body without the consent of the other person. And so therefore, rape is not consensual. Therefore, an act that is not consensual, how can that bring about shame and dishonour? Especially if that rape then turns into a pregnancy, that can cause significant issues for victims. Interfaith relationships, a Muslim having a relationship with a Christian, a Jew having a relationship with a Sikh, they're not necessarily going to be accepted by certain communities, be that they're within their own faiths and cultures. Leaving a spouse, leaving a violent spouse, or seeking divorce from a violent spouse could bring about dishonour and shame to communities. PDAs, so public displays of affection, kissing, intimacy, touching, all can be seen as acts of bringing dishonour and shame. Sexting, sexual imaging, taking photographs, again, the same. Alcohol or drugs, bringing shame and dishonour to families. That's not an exhaustive list, but I think it's important that we need to be mindful that young people may be subject to honour-based violence for reasons which may seem improbable or relatively minor to others. There are a number of indicators. As a professional, there's a number of indicators that we can look for. I think it's important as practitioners across the board that we need to not only look for signs of violence, but also those patterns of constrained behaviour which can indicate someone is being harmed or abused, or they're fearful, or their behaviour is being altered because of the abuse by others. For example, relentless messaging while somebody is at work, monitoring, feeding back to communities, being stalked and harassed by different members of the communities, being kept an eye on. All of that can be an indicator. It's likely that awareness that a child is a victim of honour-based crime will only come to light after an assault or some kind of incident has taken place. A young person disclosing domestic abuse, or a young person going missing from the family home. I think there are inherent risks to acts of disclosures for the victim, and possibly limiting opportunities to ask for help for fear of retribution from the family or their community. There may be evidence of domestic abuse, including controlling, coercive, dominating behaviour towards the victim, family disputes, unreasonable restrictions such as removal from education, not allowed to attend university, not allowed to work, for example, only go into religious groups. There's no freedom of movement. They may be imprisonment, so no access to social media, no phone, no way to communicate with the outside world outside of that family. That can lead to isolation, it can lead to depression, it can lead to self-harm, and on some occasions it could lead to attempted suicide and or actual suicide. There may be a fear of forced engagements or marriages. The other warning signs are signs of female genital mutilation. There can be a persuasion, in inverted commas, to return to the country of origin under false pretenses, when in fact the whole notion is to take them to their own country of origin to kill them. Some families will go to considerable lengths to find their children who have escaped, or not just children, but victims who have escaped. And once they have escaped, there is a significant risk of harm if they are returned back to family. They may be reported as missing by family members, but there is no mention of the reason why somebody is missing. I think it's extremely vital that we as practitioners explore underlying reasons before any decisions are made in relation to that victim. And it's extremely important that concerns about honour-based violence are taken extremely seriously. Murders in the name of so-called honour are often the culmination of a series of events over significant periods of time, and they are always planned. There tends to be a degree of premeditation, family conspiracy, and a belief that the victim deserves to die. There are numbers and numbers of cases in the UK where victims have been killed as a result of perceived dishonour. Where practitioners are concerned, they're working with victims of honour-based violence, they need to be aware of the one chance rule, and that is that they may only ever have one chance to speak to a potential victim, and that therefore that may mean that there's only one chance to save that person's life. This means all practitioners working across statutory and voluntary agencies need to be aware of their own responsibilities and obligations when they come across cases of honour-based abuse. If the victim is allowed to walk out the door without support being offered, then that only chance, has been completely wasted. It's essential that any actions do not further jeopardise that victim and that victim's safety. Do not underestimate the potential risk of harm. I'll say that again. We just cannot underestimate the potential risk of harm. Involving families in cases of honour-based abuse or violence, including forced marriage, is dangerous. We cannot use family members as interpreters. If a young person is under the age of 18 and involves social services, we may need to look at a different strategy, because including the family in said plans is going to bring about significant harm. Under no circumstances should any practitioner allow a victim's family or social network to find out about the disclosure, in order not to put the victim further at risk. In no circumstances should practitioners speak to victims in the presence of their relatives. And in no circumstances should practitioners approach family or community leaders or share any information with that community or attempt any form of mediation. Anyone who has any concerns about honour-based violence or living in a household where honour-based violence is being perpetrated, please reach out for support. Where there are immediate concerns around violence, then we must call the police. In the UK, once we call the police, we can request a Karma Nirvana trained officer. That means that trained police officer has had some training, they've got knowledge around honour-based violence, and therefore are able to conduct certain specific risk assessments and put certain things into practice. If that police officer that you are speaking to has no clue about honour-based violence or abuse, you can request another police officer who does. You can't just, as a practitioner, just think of the short-term risks, that we need to consider the longer-term risks as well. There may be some working with different agencies in order to make sure that victim is safe. It may be that there be some coordination of how we can keep that victim safe. That can be including a multi-agency approach in setting up appointments, for example, or medical examinations. It may mean that actually there needs to be immediate protection away from the family. There can be a whole range of different things that can be put in place in order to make sure that somebody is safe. I think that addressing the needs of the individual is going to be absolutely key when we are supporting victims of honour-based violence or abuse, and will require a very tailored response depending on what factors are present. So that can include, for example, levels of risk, the language and the cultural barriers, how long that somebody has been in the country, their social and family networks, and what is their economic circumstances. Continual assessments and reviews is going to be paramount, as circumstances can change very quickly. Any abuse that is often perpetrated by family members might be seen by those family members as acting protectively. Fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters may feel that what they're doing is to keep that person protected. And actually, in fact, it's not protecting somebody, it's actually harming somebody. When we are sharing information, we have to be very mindful about who we're sharing information with and why we're sharing information. I think that it is a very tricky subject to approach. I think it can cause quite a lot of anxiety in practitioners when they don't know how to support. If you have ever been threatened or abused, or if you have tried to have a relationship or marry someone outside of your community, you tried to separate or you've tried to divorce, that you're talking to people that are not seen to be appropriate within your communities, having sex before marriage, becoming pregnant, wearing clothes that are inappropriate, using drugs or alcohol, restricting education, then all of those are indicators of wrong. They are all indicators of abuse, and there is support available for you. I know that this is heavy. I know that it's a very difficult subject to talk about, and I've tried to be as sensitive as I can. This platform is not to give you all of the answers all of the time. It is just to shine a light and start having conversations. So if you want more information, have a conversation. If you need more information, have a conversation. That is what this podcast is all about, and this is what this episode is about. Know that you are not alone, and know that what you are experiencing is wrong, it's not okay, and that there is support if and when you need to leave that environment. You have just listened to an episode on honour-based abuse. It is a form of domestic abuse, and it can come in many forms. And although it is a problem in certain communities, cultural traditions do not make it okay. Abuse is abuse. No one, not even your family, has the right to control you or to harm you emotionally or physically. You are not alone. Help is available, safe, confidential, free services do exist for you. If you're at risk or if you are concerned for someone who is, please call 0800 5999 247 Monday to Friday 9 till 5.